Relationship issues?
Relationship talk
On 702.
On our relationship feature this morning, we're discussing navigating sexuality within relationships. And of course, for people who are in this situation, this can be deeply complex, especially when one partner begins to question their sexuality. And while it's completely normal for people to explore and reassess their sexuality over time, it can also feel particularly, it can feel unhappy for you, disorientating as well. For those who have long identified, for instance, as heterosexual or gay or lesbian, right? For instance, someone could be committed in a heterosexual relationship, and then they suddenly find themselves feeling attracted to the same sex, or a person in a same-sex relationship begins experiencing attraction outside of what they've always known. And these experiences can bring about confusion, and understandably so. They bring about fear, even guilt, not just for the person who's exploring their identity, but also for their partner. Because also for a partner on the receiving end, if your own husband or your own wife tells you that they are now attracted to someone of a similar sex to them, that can be devastating to you, because that's not how you've known your partner to be. Or maybe you've been in a same-sex relationship and suddenly your own partner says, well, I'm attracted to the opposite sex, and that's an attraction I've been feeling. So when you're on the receiving end, how do you deal with something like that? A lot of the people who share experiences say that kind of scenario triggers feelings of insecurity. Because you're asking yourself, is it me? Is it because I'm not enough? Is this the end of our relationship? But experts are saying that sexuality, in fact, can be fluid like that. Sexuality exists on a spectrum, and discovering new aspects of oneself doesn't automatically say that you must look at the relationship as it being over. So I would like you to share your own experiences with us if this is something you've navigated before. How have you as a couple navigated this delicate space? Have you ever been told by your lover, your partner, that they are now attracted to the opposite sex? If you were in, of course, a same-sex relationship, or maybe you were in a heterosexual relationship and your partner now told you, well, I'm attracted to now the same sex. And how did you navigate that? Did it spell the end of the relationship, or did you find ways to still accommodate the person and what their interests are and what you have built with them? You can call us on 011-883-0702 or send a WhatsApp on 072-702-1702. Nicki Brivik is a sexual wellness coach who's guiding us through this conversation. Nicki, great to chat to you again. Good morning.
Hi, Clement. Thanks again for having me. Yeah,
it's quite a tricky conversation we're having today, but it is really something that happens a lot in relationships. And maybe let me start with just your own experience as a sexual wellness coach. You speak to a lot of couples. How common is it for people to question their sexuality while they're in a committed relationship?
Well, I think the reality is that sexuality evolves over time. You know, sexuality is not always fixed or fully understood from the beginning. For many people, especially those raised in more traditional environments, there may be years of suppression and confusion, or simply a lack of language to describe what they feel. So sometimes what appears as a sudden realization is often something that's been quietly present for a long time, but that has been just suppressed or not having the right language. So it's a conversation ultimately about truth and identity and how relationships respond to change. So I think when someone realizes that they're gay or bisexual or questioning in a relationship, it can feel like a collision between the internal truth and your external commitment. And I think it's important to understand that this is really about rejecting a partner in favor of someone better. It's about an alignment with yourself. And it's a very difficult topic because for the partner on the receiving end, the emotional impact can be so profound. It can feel like rejection and betrayal, or even that the entire relationship was built on a lie. And this is, I think, where reframing becomes essential, because the relationship was not necessarily a lie. It was real within the awareness of both people that they had at that time.
Yes.
And yes, love can be genuine even if understanding evolves. And I think that's the thing. We must realize sexuality constantly evolves. And for some, it's, different orientations. But for some, it's just, new fantasies or something new exciting. So obviously some people face a more difficult decision that could actually end with the breakup of a marriage, which is obviously more difficult than maybe like a fantasy that you want to explore. But these are it's just showing that we are human and we grow and we evolve and we change.
How important is communication even before you step into that relationship or that marriage, Nicki? Because just to give an example, we often see these scenarios where someone, and let's use an example of a guy who knows that they are gay, but they get into a relationship with this woman because, for whatever reason, whether it's because he has been pressured at home, maybe it's the church, maybe he himself hasn't accepted themselves, and they enter into this relationship with this woman, and they get married, and then there's kids, and then 5 years down the line or 3 years, they say, oh, by the way, I'm gay. And the poor woman who is also invested in this then feels betrayed, because she feels like, as you said earlier, this relationship was built on a lie. You knew exactly what you were interested in. You never communicated that to me. You didn't give me an option to say no or yes, this is what I want to do. So I'm trying to figure out how important then is communication, because I would imagine if we are so frank and transparent with each other, then that allows the next person to decide whether they want to do this or not. Otherwise, they are going to feel betrayed when you leave them and you say, oh, this is who I am, when you've known all along.
Correct. So I think, what you are talking about is a slightly different situation. That is a situation where the person knows who they are, but they are choosing to suppress it, and they are getting involved in a relationship under, it's not honest. They are not communicating their truth, their authentic self. So I think there is dishonesty, and that's a very different thing than exploring your sexuality and not understanding it. So I think when you enter into a relationship, if you know you're gay and you're entering into a heterosexual relationship and you don't discuss it with your partner, you don't name it, obviously you're not communicating. Obviously then that is based on a lie. And that is dishonest. And a real relationship requires honesty and communication and trust. So none of those are present in the instance you have described. So I think that's something you've got to be very careful if you are going into that relationship knowing your truth and you're still going against it because you think you can suppress it. I think that's very unfair.
What if you don't know your truth? So what if maybe you have sensed that you are a little different, but you don't know, you don't even have the language for it.
Correct. Now that is a very different conversation, because that is what we were talking about, this expansion of your sexuality, this suddenly realizing who you might be, who you have evolved to be. So I think, that is the tension between authenticity and responsibility. How authentic are you? How much you want to live authentically. So you can't suppress who you are, and you've now discovered this part of yourself. How do you bring this into your relationship? How do you share this with your partner? And I think that's where we come back to communication and honesty and kindness and compassion. And it's about how you have that conversation, because it's very hard to suppress your truth once you know it. But it's how you share it and how you decide to go forward. I'm not saying that it won't be hurtful, but those are the key things that we have to be concerned about, is living authentically, but not doing it in a way that is nasty and unkind and untrue, and debasing what you have built.
Yeah. And I want us to also reflect on the other side of this, because there are also instances where you will have someone who engages in, a gay same-sex relationship, whether they're lesbian or they're gay. They're in this relationship, and then one day they realize, actually, I know I've been with you as a guy, but now I want to be with a woman, even though I've never been with one, or I haven't been with one in a long time. I mean, that also becomes, because then in that case, this person didn't get into the relationship to one day want to walk out, as they thought this is it for them. But now suddenly they feel, actually, I want to be with that woman and have kids with them. Is that something that you also see as well? This adverse of, because I think a lot of cases we often hear about, we know about, we read about are more, people who realize while they're in heterosexual relationships that, oh, I'm gay. This is what I've picked up about myself. And it's not often that you hear people then who are in same-sex relationships who then wake up one day, even though those cases do exist, who've left, whether they're lying to their same-sex partners or not, but they've decided, I'm going to be with the opposite sex.
Yeah, so I must say, I don't often see that. In fact, I've never seen that. I think the reality is that, people who are in the LGBTQ plus one community, they have had to explore their sexuality, and it's not easy. It's not easy not being part of the norm, in inverted commas. So when you have had to kind of take that route, it's usually because that is your truth. It's a lot easier to kind of go the heterosexual route and then realize, actually, this isn't for me. So it doesn't, I personally haven't really seen that often. I've seen people who have maybe dabbled in a bit of bisexuality, but that was more of an experimental stage, but not really a complete change. I think it normally happens the other way around. And it can be very, very difficult and very, very hard to have these conversations and to be able to live your truth, but without kind of blowing up your whole life and making the other person feel like their whole life was a lie. And I think that's where it is such a difficult topic, because, your decisions impact on your partner.
Yeah. What do you say to someone listening to us now and they're in this very situation? They're married to this man, but they know that they would love to be with a woman. They know that that's where they would really be happy. Or this guy who's listening to us, who's married to this woman, and they care about their spouses. They do. They've built wonderful families with them. But there's a yearning, because they can see that there's something outside of this that would fulfill me completely. And they don't know how to balance it. I don't want to betray my spouse. I love my family, but I also want to be completely fulfilled, and I yearn for that fulfillment. What do you advise them to do? How do they approach this?
So I think, in these situations, silence is usually very, very damaging. People delay the conversation because they're afraid of hurting their partner or blowing up their life. But the problem with this is silence creates emotional distance. It creates confusion, often resentment or acting out. And the thing that you're trying to avoid, the pain for your partner, becomes much more prolonged and much more damaging. So I think the truth, when delivered with care, although it may hurt, it creates clarity. And clarity is what allows couples to make conscious decisions. It empowers you to decide, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And so I think, although it can be so, so difficult, pretending this isn't there is not going to work in the long term. You need to start having you need to have those conversations, and you need to do it in a way that is the least hurtful. I think not blame we must avoid. It's not you. It's, I have been having these feelings. I have found, my sexuality has evolved. My sexuality has changed. I found out new things about myself. Can we go forward together in some kind of a new way? Can we use what I've now discovered and still proceed in the marriage, or do we need to end the marriage? So I think communication, again, it comes down to communication. It's how you talk about things, and also it's the timing, the tone, the turf. Don't do it in the bedroom, making the person feel less than. Do it perhaps walking in nature, across the table when no one is in a rush. And definitely talk about how you feel, not blaming it on the other partner. You don't fulfill me. You don't make me feel, sexually awakened. It's got to be about how you feel so that the other person can move forward.
Absolutely. It's 24 minutes after 11 o'clock. I see your WhatsApps coming through. We'll start with them after the break.
Relationship issues?
Relationship talk.
On 702.
27 minutes after 11 o'clock on our relationship feature this morning, we're talking about how you navigate sexuality within relationships. Let's go to your WhatsApps.
Good day, Clement, and your guest there. My take on this issue is not like you guys have already just mentioned now. The issue of asking how do you navigate it when your partner walks up to you and tell you they're now attracted to the opposite sex. I really don't think there's anything to navigate there, because when they get into the relationship, it's either they are gay or lesbian or they are straight. So if they were having feelings for an opposite same sex, and they still kept quiet and get into marriage with you or into long relationship with you, and then 10 years down the line or 5 years down the line, they'll say, by the way, I do have a feeling for same sex. I don't think it's fair. And then I don't think there's anything there to learn how to navigate. Because the only way to handle the situation is to just, go our separate ways. And that's just my take on this. Paul here from Kempton Park. Nice show as always. Thank you.
Thank you, man, for your contribution. I mean, Nicki, you said earlier, and the solution is not always to just end things. You were saying earlier, open the conversation. If you come and you say, this is what I'm picking up, this is what I am feeling, this is what my position is now on my sexuality, open the conversation with your partner and involve them in whatever decision then you guys are going to make, as opposed to just think this is going to end in the relationship or the marriage ending.
Yes, I mean, I think we need to redefine what does success in a relationship mean. We've been conditioned to believe that a successful relationship is one that lasts forever in the original form, but in reality, relationships are living systems. They grow, they evolve, or at least they actually should. So I think it's important to remember that if you are the partner who's been told that say your husband says, I'm gay, it's not about failure as a partner. It's about a shift in identity or awareness. And it's not because of you, although it still hurts. And both things can be true. It's not personal and it still feels deeply personal. But I think it doesn't automatically mean that your entire relationship was a lie. It doesn't mean that it means that something has changed and come into your awareness. And now how do you deal with this subject? What do you do? Some people are okay with living with no sex or maybe opening up the relationship. Usually, especially when the person is gay, it does require breakup. But sometimes I found that the party that was, say, the injured, I'm putting inverted commas, the person whose partner left them, they are forced into a sexual awakening of their own. Because their partner has kind of left them, they start to think about what do they want? How can their sexuality evolve? And I'm not necessarily saying they also become gay or realize they're gay. I'm just saying that maybe they weren't so happy in their sexual relationship. And now they can choose what they want. And in a new relationship, they often find an amazing kind of rebirth, a reinvention of their own sexuality, because what they thought was what all there is now not all there is, and they've kind of found themselves in a new relationship. So sometimes all is well that ends well, even though it often doesn't feel like that at the beginning.
Yeah. Right. After the latest in Eyewitness News headlines, we'll go to more of your calls and WhatsApp voice notes. It's 11:32.
Relationship issues
Relationship Talk.
on 702.
It's 23 minutes now before 12 o'clock. We're in conversation with Nicki Brivik, who's a sexual wellness coach, as we continue our discussion around navigating sexuality within relationships. Have you found yourself in a heterosexual relationship where you had to tell your partner about your sexuality, you had to come clean, or maybe you were on the receiving end? Maybe it was your husband or your wife or your partner who told you about their sexuality. How did you navigate that scenario? And in cases where, as Nicki said, she has not seen this, but perhaps it's happened, the case where someone has been in a same-sex relationship and now is in a heterosexual relationship. How did you navigate that? Were you able to find common ground with your partner, or it ended up in betrayal and the end of the relationship? You can call us, send us a WhatsApp voice note. Let's start with your voice notes on 0727021702.
Hello, Clement. This is quite a sensitive issue. A friend of mine, it isn't all advice, from where I'm sitting, from the experience my friend had, especially if you are in a heterosexual relationship and you discover that, okay, you might be attracted to a guy. I'd advise you just, you quietly break up and move on, because of my friend once opened up to the girlfriend, and that this is the way I feel, and I want, how I want to end this. Did the girl not go and, just, it was so messy. She told the family, and this guy was not even ready to come out. It was just bad. I just wish the guy didn't even tell the girl. She was so bitter about it, and she made it hell for him. Prince.
Yeah. I mean, there are instances like that, Nicki, where someone may feel betrayed, or they may feel, oh my God, why are you only telling me this now? You probably knew, and we've built this entire thing. I've invested so much in this thing, and you're telling me this. So those betrayals do exist, but to a point where you even go to the person's family and you start exposing them there and saying, this is what this person does. There are cases like that, yeah?
I mean, it's obviously extremely difficult for a person to receive news that their partner is gay, because it does call into question your whole relationship. And it's very, very hard to take that, because, in fairness to this woman, she had planned her whole life with him. She thought they had a future together. And, it's very, very hard to kind of take that news. But silence is also not an option. I mean, this guy couldn't have just carried on staying in that relationship. And, I understand she acted in hurt. I suppose the family would have found out eventually. And she probably needed support and help. What does she do? Her partner's gay, and she might feel that he doesn't want her anymore. And it is a very, very difficult and sensitive topic. And it can be very, very hurtful, but not with intention. I think that's the thing. When you are exploring your sexuality and your authentic self has to come out, it's not because you want to hurt the partner. And I think that's why you just have to deal with it in such a very, very compassionate, kind, caring way. But the only way out is through. Sometimes it needs a lot of time for the person who's been hurt to get over it and to move on.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a number of messages that have come through, Nikki, so I want us to just go through them on the WhatsApp line. The first one says, "Hi, Clement and team. I once dated a guy who was basically discovering himself. He later asked for a meeting with my family, as we had been together for 6 months and my family knew him. So he came and told us that he is gay and can no longer continue with the relationship. Honestly, I was hurt because we had dreams and things we wanted to achieve together. So when he dropped the shell, when he dropped the bomb, I think that's what he meant, I felt like our plans were also crushed. Moving on was really tough, but I still appreciate his honesty to this day."
Exactly. That's exactly what we were saying. And I think that caller put it so well. And is grateful eventually for the truth.
Another one says, "Hello, Clement. I'm a gay guy. I met this guy a few years back and he had a girlfriend and a child, and he disclosed all that upfront. But he said that he's not sure about his sexuality. And he was handsome and all that. He charmed me. I fell for him. It turns out he wasn't really ready to venture into being bisexual. It ended up badly, and it almost destroyed me, especially emotionally. It took me years to forgive myself and move on." Another one says, "Clement, I'm battling with this matter. I don't know if I'm gay or bisexual. I enjoyed sex with both. Of course, with guys in hiding. I enjoy just dominating another man. Could it be deep psychological issue?" That's a question that Anonymous is raising there. Anonymous is not really sharing with us whether, he's in a relationship perhaps with a woman and then secretly also being with men and trying to navigate that and balancing it. Like, do you want to be with this or that, or do you actually want to do both? But those are some of the messages that have come through. In some cases, Nikki, people get to a point where they say, okay, if this is a scenario we're faced with, let's consider an open relationship. What should couples carefully think through before going down this specific route of open relationships?
So I think, when couples are navigating this, if it's a gay person, the open relationship will not necessarily, it's basically changing the form of the relationship. So I think like any open relationship, it requires communication and honesty and trust. And those are very important things, because without them, you cannot have any relationship, never mind an open relationship. But it's about changing the form of the relationship. Are you willing to stay in a relationship that you're not going to have sex with the person? I think when it's a bisexual, when it comes to bisexuality, the conversation is more nuanced, because there you can still kind of have sex in the relationship. But I think it's about making agreements. Can your relationship accommodate the truth within its boundaries? And can you change the form of your relationship? And do you want to? Or do you want to find someone else, move out? As we said earlier, a relationship doesn't have to be forever. Sometimes they're not meant to be forever. So I think whatever relationship you choose, it needs to be with honest and open communication, and choosing together how you want to go forward with honesty. Because I think, like that one listener who wrote in, it was the dishonesty that is so ruinous to a relationship and to yourself. That's what cuts us. Even though the truth is difficult at the beginning, once we can overcome that and we realize it's not about us, then the truth sets us free, So. I think it's all about communication.
Yeah. So because of course, there are instances where some couples will want to explore. Maybe one person in that relationship wants to explore whenever they start feeling like, I'm navigating a sexuality dynamic here. So how can couples balance, giving space for exploration while still maintaining honesty and boundaries in the relationship? And I know you spoke a lot about communication, so I'm assuming here that don't go explore when you haven't had a conversation with your partner, because then it stops being honest.
Correct. Then it's about dishonesty and duplicity, and that's only going to lead to hurtfulness. But on the other hand, you also have to be honest with yourself and truthful with yourself. So it's such a difficult conversation. Both parties are often hurt, but I think with time, like that one listener who wrote in, I think eventually, if you are honest and you handle it with dignity and kindness, when you kind of get to the end, both parties are in a better position. Because suppressing your sexuality is also not an answer. Staying in a relationship when this is not true to who you are, that's also not an answer.
Yeah.
There's
another message.
It's difficult.
From Anonymous, Nicki, who says, hi Clement, I am almost 50 years old and I've been with my husband for 24 years now. And I just can't ignore my attraction to women anymore. I acted on it. I guess I wanted to see if I really am attracted to women, or is it just a phase? But it's definitely not a phase. And now I'm living a double life and a balancing act that takes so much from me. And it's so tiring. I have young kids and I don't want to disrupt their lives by coming out. Well, at least not now. And I am very much still in love and attracted to their father. That's a message there coming from Anonymous. And I mean, it's so complex because there are kids here that are involved. You don't want to hurt them. You're still also in love with their father. But then there's this attraction to women that you just can't shake off.
Yeah, so that is difficult. And you know, that shows how she hasn't been able to silence her truth, but she's chosen to be unfaithful. And she could choose to rather be honest. We don't know how her husband might take that. Perhaps he would be open to opening up their marriage, to allowing a third party in. We don't know because she hasn't spoken to him about it. But the problem is her dishonesty here, as she says, is keeping her exhausted, keeping her, kind of caged in her own dishonesty. And I think that's where we go back to that whole, let's be honest, try and be honest with your partner, so that you can perhaps find a new way to evolve in that particular relationship. You never know, it could really work. You just don't know because she hasn't had the conversation with the father of her kids.
All right, it's going up to 10 minutes now before 12 o'clock. We'll wrap up with more messages after the break.
Relationship issues,
Relationship Talk
on 702.
8 minutes before 12 o'clock, we've been having a conversation this morning on our relationship feature about navigating issues of sexuality in relationships, in marriages as well. And thank you so much for just sharing what your experiences are. I can only imagine how difficult it is to actually admit it to yourself and also be vulnerable enough to share your story with us. So I truly appreciate it. Nicki, we are going to wrap up now the conversation. There was a question that came earlier about therapy. Would you recommend therapy in these situations? And do you think individual therapy works, or is it more a couples therapy? Or must the person be brave enough to start that conversation with their partner? Or can you bring in a third party to facilitate that chat? Because sometimes people will feel a bit uncomfortable hearing it for the first time in front of somebody else.
Yeah, I think, therapy is always helpful. I certainly think for establishing what you need, for the person who is exploring their sexuality and coming to terms with this massive change that they maybe didn't realize was within them. Obviously therapy is very, very helpful for them. Relationship therapy, that's not really going to help, because if the one is gay and wants to leave the relationship, then no. With regards to a bisexual person, then it could help. It could help establishing a new form of marriage. So a change in the system that you've chosen. So that can definitely help. But I mean, I'm a big fan of therapy, so it can definitely help. Whether you want to be telling your partner that you are gay in front of the therapist for the first time, that's something you have to judge. You've got to know your relationship. I think you can't avoid pain, but you can move through it with integrity. And I think that's how you choose to do that. And the best way forward for you need to know that, because you've been the person in that relationship. And how do you change in a relationship? How do you handle the change? A relationship doesn't fail because of the truth, but because the truth doesn't have somewhere to land. And I think we just all need to try and be better and keep growing and keep broadening ourselves, so that we can bob and weave with what life sends us. And that sexuality in particular is something that we don't look at expanding. And I think that's where my passion is making people look at their sexuality, not just their orientation, but how to enhance their lives through their sexuality and embrace every part of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes it leads to great rewards.
Yeah. What are some of the key questions couples must ask themselves when deciding whether to stay together or part ways, or when deciding what decision really to take, what next step to take?
So I think that again is communication. Some people choose monogamy and honor their attraction internally. So, in other words, I'm still attracted to the other people, but I will stay monogamous to you. I think if you're gay, that's extremely difficult, because then you are actually completely suppressing your sexuality. But if you're bisexual, you are still attracted to your partner. So perhaps that is a choice. You could renegotiate your boundaries, perhaps have an open relationship like you said earlier. Some realize that their needs are just no longer compatible. And as we said earlier, that not all relationships are created for forever, and that we need to move on. So I think this just requires this open, honest communication. I don't think you need to rush it. I think the first conversation should be slow. These are the feelings I'm having. How do we deal with this? Is there somewhere we can go with this? Let the other person ruminate over it.
Yeah.
And I think no decision needs to be made in the first conversation. I think we need to slow down and move in that way.
Take your time, yeah. Nicki,
Correct.
Thank you so much for always being so gracious and guiding us through these complex situations. I really appreciate your time. Can't wait to chat to you again. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Clement. Can I ask your followers to follow me on
Yes, please.
Instagram? It's ask.Nicki, Nicki, and I'm on all the social platforms, but particularly Instagram, and I give lots of tips and advice and sex education that we all need, and all these topics that we discuss come up. So please follow me, and I've got a book coming out in June, Sexponential. So hopefully you'll come, Clement. I'm going to have a launch in Joburg.
No, I'll definitely be there. Thank you so
Great.
much, Nicki.
Thank you.
Before 12.
Are your